Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Hey everybody, it's your host AZ, and I'm here for another solo episode this week. And today I want to talk about an Instagram post I put up, I think a little over 2 weeks ago now. And it was a review of a paper, Anthropometric Analysis of Female Firefighters versus the General Population. And I love and appreciate all of my followers on Instagram. And this is just one of those posts that I won't say it went viral, but I had probably easily 10 times as many likes and interaction on this post than I've had in some recent posts. But in summary, this was a paper, and I will put the paper in the podcast show notes. But it was summarizing I'm just going to go through the slides from the Instagram post. The paper admitted PPE doesn't fit anyone extraordinarily well, but females have about a 4 times more likely chance to report a fit issue and about a third likely more chance to experience an injury due to their PPE that doesn't fit them. And although there is a company now making gear based on female sizing patterns, those sizing patterns were based on a database of the general population. And what the research is showing is that both in public safety and the military, the women that are in these careers have significantly different body types than the general population. So for firefighters, they tend to be significantly taller than the general population. They have wider hips and waists, likely due to greater levels of physical fitness. So, in order to do this job, you have to be strong, you have to be fit. And so, it kind of follows that our bodies are more fit. There are significant differences in leg inseam and back waist length, and that further underscores the need to have female specific firefighter gear patterns. So, this poor fit comes from the design. That's an issue, but it can also come from inaccurate measurements and a sizing system that just isn't efficient. And so, when I got my second set of firefighter turnout gear, the person that measured me was unwilling to put the tape measure tight enough against my chest to get an accurate measurement. So, of course, when I got the gear, the chest area was just ginormous. So, that was an inaccurate measurement problem. So, even if we are making gear based on the general female population, it's still likely not going to fit female firefighters as well as it probably could. So, my final thoughts on this were awareness and advocacy is the first step. There are brands that are utilizing female patterns, but they're not yet based on female firefighter specific body types. And so my call to action was to get everyone involved in Dr. Meredith McQuarrie and Dr. Cassandra Kwan's 2D scanning project. And I put the link to that in my Instagram bio, and I'll also put it in the link to the show notes. I'll put the link in the show notes. I'm sorry. But it's really interesting. I've gotten a lot of comments on the posts, and some of them have been, well, the most recent one was, where do you get the assertions that female firefighters are taller? I am short. So to me, that just sends the message that you don't understand how research works, because although I recognize that you are short, that is your lived experience. That is not what they're seeing in the research project. And so to that person, I encourage them, like, yes, N equals 1 is important. It is important to recognize that you are short, and also having patterns based on actual female bodies and then scaling it down for someone that is short is going to help things fit better. But just several comments like that just made me realize that people just kind of don't understand how research works. And so what I wanted to talk about today was just that, How does research work? So the first thing that I want to bring your attention to is Doctors McQuarrie and Kwan appeared on a previous episode. It was way back on episode 65. And that is that's when they were talking about their initial research, when they were finding that these women in public safety and the military, our bodies are not representative of the general female population. So I will link the previous episode in the show notes. I will also link the most current paper, the one that the Instagram post was referencing, in the show notes. And I'm going to also link their scanning project research to the show notes. And so here's what that would look like participating in that. You put on, say, a pair of yoga pants and a tight fitting tank top. You download an app, and you follow the directions on the app. It's very simple, but this app basically scans your anthropometrics of your body, and it sends the information to the lab. Now, here's the cool thing. It doesn't send a picture of you. It sends an avatar. And so it gets all of the information from this simple scan. And through collecting and curating, collating, whatever you want to call this information, they are going to be able to make patterns that more effectively represent the body types that are doing the job. So that's the project. I'll link it in the show notes. But let's just talk about understanding research. So the first thing we need to understand is not all research is created equal. We're going to start right there, because if you only remember one thing from this entire podcast, it should be this: all research is not created equal. And just because someone says there's a study that shows, that doesn't mean you should trust it blindly. So I'm okay with people asking questions about the study. What I'm not okay with is people saying, because I am short, this study is full of crap. That means they don't understand research. So just because someone cites a study doesn't mean you follow it blindly. You have to dig a lot deeper. And the first question I always ask is, was the study done in cells, in a petri dish? Was it done in an animal model, or was it done in actual humans? And then there's a second part of that question. Do the actual humans represent the population of what we're looking at? If we're going to be really honest, most of the biomedical research in the past decades has been done on males. And we actually, in some cases, don't even know how well it applies to females. So was it done in a cell model? Was it done in animals? Was it done in actual humans? And then are those humans representative of the population that we're asking about? Because there's a massive difference between something that works in a petri dish, something that works in naked mole rats, and something that actually benefits human beings, especially human beings that are wearing 75 pounds of bunker gear on a day when it's 100 degrees outside and they're walking into a 1,000-degree oven, i.e. a structure fire. So great. If you have a supplement that kicks ass in mice, that's wonderful. Good on you. But that doesn't mean squat to a firefighter that's climbing stairs with a high-rise pack. So we need to make sure that research is done in a system, we'll call it that, that's representative of us. So that's first question. Second question, what is the study design? Because so many times, I think I've mentioned this before, people have talked to me about, I want to do this study in firefighters. And when they tell me about the study design, they're asking a question that is finding an answer that doesn't even apply to us. And so, someone once wanted to do a study about jumping down off of the truck. And I had to point out to them, like, we're not jumping down off of the truck. We are holding on for dear life and gingerly stepping down, hoping not to break an ankle every time we do it. So what's the study design? Is it randomized? Meaning, does the person getting the treatment, is that done in a random fashion? Or am I, wink, wink, giving the supplement to all of the people that are already muscle mommies and muscle daddies, right? It has to be random. The supplement or whatever you're studying, the treatment protocol has to be random. And then is it controlled? Meaning, is there a group that's not getting the treatment? Is it double blind? To really, really do research well, we have to make sure that neither the participant nor the researcher knows whether the participant is getting the real treatment or the placebo or control. Or was it just something like, hey, we tried something on a few people and here's what happened? There really wasn't a control group. There's no comparison. So we really don't know what caused the change. And so I guess an example of this would be, we have a whole bunch of people that are hurt and we gave them this special alkaline water. And 6 weeks later, they're not hurt anymore. But we didn't control that. And how do we know that just the amount of time for healing wasn't 6 weeks? And everybody's going to be better in 6 weeks, regardless of whether they got the alkaline water or not. So if there's no control group, we can't compare and we really don't know what caused the change. So the third thing we need to talk about is the sample size. So, if it was done on a set of 5 or a group of 5 sedentary college kids, I don't care what you found and how statistically significant it is. It really doesn't tell us how the information would apply to, say, sleep deprived, exposed to trauma firefighters dragging hose lines. Like, first of all, that sample size is really small. And second of all, that sample is a group of people that don't have much to do with structural firefighting. So when we're doing studies, we need enough participants to trust the results weren't just random noise. And I always like to talk about the Sullivan study because that was done in a very large group of firefighters, 6,000 firefighters. And so just briefly, what they found was that when they screened the firefighters, around 37% of them had a diagnosable sleep issue, whether it was apnea or insomnia or something like that. But the interesting part of it was, of those 37% that had a diagnosable sleep disorder, 80% of them didn't know and they weren't treated. And so it's really, really hard to ignore those results when it was done in firefighters and it wasn't 3 firefighters, it was 6,000 firefighters. We know that the results that they found there weren't just random noise. The fourth thing that we have to consider is, did someone fund their research and where was it published? Now, just because the Dairy Council funded a research on whey protein supplementation, that doesn't mean that the research is flawed. It does mean, however, that we should probably take a little bit more critical look at it just to make sure everything's in alignment, everything's in order. And so, for example, if a CBD company paid for a study that said CBD reduces stress in high heat environments, we would maybe need to be cautious. There is some bias there. And it doesn't necessarily mean the study's wrong. It just means that we need to be super, super eyes wide open when we're looking at those results. And then, where was it published? Was it published in a high impact journal? Was it published in the Wall Street Journal? It really makes a difference where these things are published. And as a side note, just because the New York Times talks about science, it doesn't necessarily mean that their interpretation of the science is accurate. So a lot of times they have sensational headlines and clickbait. And when you really read the scientific article, it doesn't say exactly what the New York Times said that it said. So here's your takeaway. Usually, human studies are much more applicable. We need to make sure that the study design is solid. We need to make sure that there's an adequate sample size. And, I can't give you a number for adequate, but we just have to be really, really cognizant. Is it a case study of one person or is it a really large sample size? And when we look at it, we want to make sure that, I guess make sure isn't the right word. We want to look at whether what they were looking at closely mimics our sphere, if you will. So again, if we're looking at a study where we're testing the efficacy of a supplement and it was tested during structural firefighter simulations in a large group of subjects, that's probably a little bit more applicable to us than, say, it was done in grade school, children playing on the playground. All of that said, sometimes we can infer efficacy as long as we don't cast our net too broadly. So Dr. Kreider did some research in creatine in Division I football players. And if I remember correctly, they weren't even administering the creatine. They were simply surveying the football players on whether they were taking creatine or not. And what they found was the football players that were taking creatine had a lower heart rate, sweat rate, and core temperature than the football players that were not. So we could infer that the same thing would happen in firefighters. I would not say that with my whole chest loudly. I would say it in the same way I just told you. This is what happens in Division I football players. There's no reason to think that the same thing wouldn't happen during structural firefighting, but a little nod to Dr. Brittany Hollerbeck, more research needed. And there are several groups of us out there that are actually looking at that. So, number 2, your lived experience is not a study. I am so sorry. The fact that you have a short inseam or you have long arms is not representative of the population. Your personal lived experience is important. N=1 is important, but it is not the same thing as a data set. So you personally may have found some workout, a supplement, a breathing technique that really helped you. Great. That does not mean it's going to help others. And it certainly doesn't mean it's appropriate for your whole department or the fire service as a whole. Your personal experience is not data. And it is so tempting to say, well, this worked for me, so I implemented it with my crew and it worked for them. But again, science is not that N=1. Your lived experience is important to you. And N=1 is 100% the weakest level of evidence there is for anything. We do not make policy based on one guy's story. Cool story, bro. That's how fads spread, not best practices. So, for example, maybe you did a 30-day cold plunge challenge and it felt amazing. You felt amazing. That is cool. But does that mean that cold plunges should be required recovery modality at your firehouse? Not unless you've got more than just your personal feelings to go on. So, again, N=1 is important. Your lived experience is important. The fact that you personally are short is important, but that is not data. So your personal story or anecdote might be a great starting point for research, but it is definitely not the finish line. And if you are trying to influence others, you owe them a lot more than it worked for me. Number 3, anecdotes are not evidence. So we're going to stick with this theme for just a second, that anecdotes are not evidence. A firefighter might say, I started doing this breathing technique and now I don't get tunnel vision during calls. Awesome. Is that repeatable? Is it typical? Or are you the exception? So this is a little bit related to the last one about your experiences in a study. You probably wouldn't say, my cousin survived a rollover without wearing a seatbelt and he was drunk as a skunk. So therefore, driving sober and wearing seatbelts is totally pointless. I think they call it survivorship bias. It's a one-off story, and it does not disprove an entire body of evidence. Just because your cousin was able to survive a rollover without his seatbelt and without being ejected does not mean that that disputes the decades of evidence that are already established that seatbelts save lives. And here's the thing. We do this in health and wellness all the time. We say, this protein shake cured my GERD, or I have not been sick since I started drinking alkaline water. Maybe, but are you the norm or are you the unicorn? Are you actually remembering things accurately? Did you take notes the day you started taking that protein shake? Did you then go back to the doctor and get, the proclamation of your GERD being cured? And even if you did, it's N equals 1. So here's a fireground application. A certain supplement might make you feel less gassed during an SCBA drill. Good for you. But until that effect is tested across multiple firefighters, across multiple departments, across multiple parts of the country with controlled and randomization and measured outcomes, it's just a story. So we have to be careful with this. It's back to the control and the randomization. When we're looking at fitness type research and wellness type research, when we recruit for that research, we tend to get the people that are already more fit, more well, more whatever. So even if I went out onto your fireground training drill and I said, raise your hand if you want to try this new supplement during this training session, more than likely, the people that are going to raise their hands are going to be biased in the fact that they already take supplements. They're already okay with supplements. They might be more fit as it is already. So if I ask them who's willing to take it, I'm getting a flawed data set. And so even though I have the control of people that said they don't want to take it, it's not random. And therefore that data isn't going to be as quote unquote clean as it could be. So here's your takeaway for this. Stories can definitely be a springboard, but they are not a substitute for data. We need evidence that scales far beyond just the individual. Number 4, correlation does not equal causation. I have a fantastic graphic. It shows the Lululemon stock prices and their fluctuation, and it tracks exactly with the commonality with naming your kid Steve. It tracks exactly. But when you think about it, the name Steve has nothing to do with Lululemon, and those things, although correlated, there's no causation there. My favorite one was a little fake study where they determined that kids with bigger feet are better at math. Well, also, kids with bigger feet are generally older, so they are going to be better at math. So it has nothing to do with their feet. It has everything to do with the fact that they're older. So two things happening at the same time does not mean one caused the other. And that's one of the biggest logic traps that people fall into when they're interpreting research. So let's just say you started sleeping better, whether that's, who knows why. You made more effort, you lost some stress in your life, whatever, you start sleeping better. And your VO2 max also improves around the same time. And now you say, better sleep makes fitter firefighters. Maybe, but was it actually the sleep? Maybe it was your training intensity. So because you slept better, you could train more intensely and therefore got better results. So maybe it's an indirect effect of the sleep, but maybe it was you started eating breakfast and you started eating more protein, and that allowed you to get bigger, stronger muscles, which allowed you to work out harder. Maybe you stopped drinking so much coffee, and yes, you started sleeping better, but maybe there's some indirect effect of all of that caffeine. We don't know. We have no idea, but we're looking at correlation and causation, and that's problematic. So in the fire service, here's a great example. Since we started doing yoga before shift, we've had fewer injuries. Okay. Is that the only thing that changed? We have to be careful with our messaging because this is a message that I have sent before. When we started doing early morning workouts that included a dynamic warm-up, muscle activation, and a little bit of stretching, our injury rate, I would say anecdotally, our injury rate went through the floor. We also got a refund from our workers' comp carrier because our injuries went down so much. But I say anecdotally because there were a lot of other things that were happening at the same time. A lot of old guys were retiring at the same time. And usually those catastrophic injuries usually are in older individuals. At the same time, some people that had been on workers' comp a really long time cycled off the books. They also retired. So there was a lot of other things going on. Did that early morning training session probably help? It probably did, but we can't say our injuries decreased because of it. So anecdotally, this is what happened. Would I recommend that you try it? I certainly would. But I'm not going to say again with my full chest that warming up in the morning is going to decrease your injury rate. So a well-designed study is going to control for all the other variables so you can isolate the actual cause and effect. So correlation means that two things are occurring together. Causation means one caused the other, and we cannot confuse the two of them. Number 5, back to that sample size. A study with 10 people might tell you something interesting. It might say maybe. A study with 300 people might be able to tell you probably. A study with 6,000 people, well-designed study, probably can tell you a little bit more, probably. So, smaller samples are tending to be skewed. The data is skewed by some random results and outliers. And so, for example, let's say a fitness program improved performance in 6 volunteer firefighters. That's really cool. But were they already really fit? Did they perhaps do more on their own because they were excited to be involved in the study? And so, oh my gosh, I'm doing a fitness program and I think I'm going to try to eat better too. That's one of the controls that we need to look at. Now, if we compare that to a study of 250 firefighters from all different departments and we see improvement there, that's a little bit stronger evidence. So your takeaway is this: a bigger sample is more confidence, usually better confidence. And the more people it works for, the more likely it'll work for you. Number 6, statistical significance isn't everything. People love saying the results were statistically significant, but what does that really mean? All in all, it just means that the result probably wasn't due to random chance. But it doesn't mean that it's important in the real world, and that's what we have to key in on. So, statistical significance is amazing. The result probably wasn't due just to random chance, but does it matter in the world? So, here's a great example. I have this supplement. It's going to improve grip strength by 1% in firefighters, and it's statistically significant. Okay, but what is a 1% greater grip strength really going to do for us on the fire ground? It's statistically significant, but is it doing anything for us? Here's a better example. I have a running program that is going to improve your 1 mile run time by, let's say, 5 seconds. Okay, but on your 1 mile run time, improving it by 5 seconds, although that's great and that's a win, in the big scheme of things, does it really matter on the fire ground? But what if I was able to find a program that could improve your ability to move heavy objects out of the training tower? So you see where I'm going here. Heavy objects, a human. I'm able to improve your ability to move heavy objects out of the training tower 5 seconds faster. It's not statistically significant, but most people improve their performance by 5 seconds. Now we've got something that could matter, even if it's not statistically significant. It's practically useful, and that's important too. So, yes, is statistical significance important? It is. Is it everything? It isn't. Here's another example. Let's go back to that mile run. I can improve your mile run by 0.3 seconds. Big, hairy deal. I mean, even at the elite level, maybe that matters, but for the general population, 0.3 seconds on a mile run isn't really a big, hairy deal. What if I could improve your 100-meter dash by 0.3 seconds? That's a big deal. So we have to look at, what are we trying to perform? What is the improvement we're getting? Is it statistically significant? Is it practically significant? Number 7, one study is not a verdict. So let's say you found a study that said foam rolling improves your performance, but then there's 25 others that say it doesn't. So we have to look at replication of studies. That's why the creatine research is so great, because there's some older, this is another Instagram interaction. Someone sent me an Instagram post saying that taking creatine, I think it was post-workout, makes a huge difference in muscle accretion. And so yes, everyone should be taking it post-workout. And I sent it to Forbes. I'm like, Forbes, I have not heard this, seen this before. And he said, yeah, it's an old study. It wasn't a great study design, and it's been refuted multiple times thereafter. So we want to look at replication. Is one study the be all end all? It is not. So the problem that we run into as firefighters is that we tend to cherry pick studies that support our bias that we already have and the idea that we want to put forth. So we need to also look at what the total body of evidence says. And if this is a new line of research, the total body of evidence isn't going to be big. And you have to keep that in mind. So your takeaway, one study is a start, but real confidence comes from replication and consistent results. Number 8, and I know this is going to frustrate you, science changes, and that's a good thing. What we know today is not the same thing as what we're going to know in even 10 years. What we knew about creatine in the 90s is not the same thing we know about creatine today. And that's a good thing. We're evolving. And people complain, like my favorite one is eggs. They say eggs are good for us. They say eggs are bad for us. They say we shouldn't eat eggs. We should eat eggs. The next year they're good. Like that is a little bit frustrating, but it's not weakness, it's strength. And I would challenge you, if you had been getting your information about eggs from actual research and not the news for these decades, it hasn't been fluctuating back and forth as much as the news would make it sound like. So when we're looking at fire service, think of your SOPs. You update them on what you learn, and that's how science works as well. So the takeaway is this: if someone has not updated their stance in years, that is a red flag, not a badge of honor. When we know more, we want to change our stance. Ooh, I said cherry picking already. Here's cherry picking right here. It is not evidence-based. If someone only quotes from one study that supports their point of view and ignores all of the rest, they are cherry picking. And here's the thing: you can find a study to support almost anything. But what matters is the weight of the evidence, the study design, the statistical significance. How big was the study? Was it randomized and controlled, double blind? How good is that research? And then can we replicate it? And if you think about it this way, science isn't about proving your opinion. It's about following where the evidence leads and then forming your opinion, even if it's not comfortable or convenient for you. Number 10, mechanism doesn't equal outcome. This one is really important. When you look at those supplements that say this boosts nitric oxide, this activates recovery pathways, this increases testosterone. Yes, that is cool, but so what? does it actually give an outcome in the body? Because mechanism is a theory and outcome is what actually happens. And so if it only works in theory, if it only boosts testosterone, but nothing else happens, it's not really ready for real world use. And so my favorite thing about this is there are a lot of things that can boost muscle protein synthesis. But does that boost in muscle protein synthesis actually translate to building more muscle, or is it just activating pathways? Number 11, no control group, no confidence. So I said it already, but I'm going to say it again. If you don't have a control group, we don't know what caused the results. Maybe people are just getting stronger from time to time in their lives. Maybe they're just a little bit more motivated. Maybe there's a placebo effect, because the placebo effect accounts for quite a large chunk of what happens when people, let's say, take a supplement or they take a medication. There's a percentage of results that is accounted for by the placebo effect. So if there's no comparison group, if there's no control, there's no real way to tell whether the intervention worked or if it didn't work. Number 12, new doesn't mean better. There is always, always, always a new trend, because here's the thing, people want to sell things. So some of the latest ones I've seen, tape in your mouth shut, cryo chambers, vibration therapy. Some of these have been around for a while too. But guess what always still works? Sleep, training, nutrition, recovery, wash, rinse, and repeat. So just because something's trendy, it doesn't necessarily mean it's trustworthy. So you need to let it play out a little bit more before it earns your trust. And so one of the really controversial things that's happening right now is the cold plunging. And again, if you love it, do it. But the latest research that's coming out is starting to say it's not really that great for recovery. And it's definitely blunting your post-workout gains, if you will. So again, let something earn your trust before you hop on a trend. So always go back to the basics. And the basics, again, sleep, training, nutrition, recovery. Anything that's new, make sure that they are earning their place in your life, not by hype, but actually by outperforming the basics. I want you to understand that when people say we can make stats say anything, well, if you're not reputable, you certainly can. And if you don't understand study design, you certainly can. And so be a good consumer of research. But when you are in people's comments on Instagram, asking where they got the assertions from, first look at the citation and then look at the way things were worded. Nowhere in that post did I say that all female firefighters are taller than the general population. I said the female firefighting population tends to be taller than the general population. I'm going to let you guys go. You have a fabulous week. AZ is out.